Ron, it's so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Well, you know what? I've been looking forward to this, and even the title of your podcast, Davey, I'll explain that momentarily, but you'll know why it is, shall we say, destiny that we talk to each other, divine destiny.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as I was reading up on some more of your story, and I was growing increasingly excited about this conversation. Partially because we have a very similar journey, but we also have a very different journey, and kind of some of the timing of our journey and our loss. But we talk about a lot when I talk to widowers that we have all stepped into a club that nobody wanted to pay the membership dues for. And I know that you referenced the book that you have just written and released, that this was the book you never wanted to write. And I can completely understand that. And yet here we are. And I know that this conversation is going to be so richly impactful for so many people as they're listening to just your years of faithfulness and your perspective from kind of the side of life that you're on right now. I'm so excited for them to hear from you.
Is years of faithfulness a synonym for old?
Maybe cloaked a little bit.
Very nice way to say it.
Well, Proverbs talks about how gray hair means wisdom, not age. It's wisdom, right? This is there. Yeah. It's the positive spin on all of it. But the truth is that, the older that I get, the more I want to hear from people who have walked life and who have journeyed the ups and downs. And I want to hear, okay, what are the pitfalls that I'm going to run into? And how can I walk faithfully in the same way that other people have? So I'm super excited about this. Ron, why don't you tell us a little bit about just your life right now, and then let's jump back from there and let's talk a little bit about your story of loss.
Sure. I the last 4.5, almost 5 years now, of course, have revolutionized my life because I grew up, just real quickly, I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a family where I never heard about Jesus until my baby brother died. My dad didn't go to church, but he took me there. He thought, for some reason, the one boy he had left ought to go to church. And that's where I found Jesus. And eventually my dad and my mom did. I got a brand new mommy. I got a brand new daddy. And that part was awesome. So I know what lost is, and I know what found is, and saw it dramatically in my parents. I am today, you ask what I'm doing today, basically it's what I've done my whole life, which is to, at least my whole adult life, is to try in a contemporary, understandable, non-religious way, explain to people the difference that this man Jesus can make in their life, to do things, to go places in your heart that only he can go, to make changes that you never could and you would have if you could have, but he can make those changes, to make the unbearable bearable, to make the undoable doable. He's an amazing Jesus. I've been on every continent except for Antarctica because I don't know if penguins have souls. I don't think they do, but every continent but that one, and had the privilege to talk about this and a lot of I've always done cross-cultural youth ministry my whole life. I've worked with Harlem kids and Chinatown kids and rich white kids and poor white kids. But some years ago, I went to a reservation and discovered the only kids I've ever met with no dreams. They're Native American kids.
Wow.
And for the past 29 years, we have been very involved. We've been on about 100 reservations. My wife co-founded everything I've ever done. She was a great leader. And in fact, there was some discussion when we were married. I know that I did it for love. Some thought she did it for pity. And so I have to tell you, can I tell you a little bit about Karen?
I would love to hear about her.
That goes the rest of the podcast. No. I'll keep it short. She was a farm girl from the Ozarks, grew up without running water and electricity. And I'm a Chicago boy, city boy. And we met in college in Chicago. And she was a little slow in realizing how awesome I was. And you should laugh.
I can resonate with that. I feel like, both my late wife and my wife now, I feel like that was the case for them. they drug their feet, and I had to keep pursuing
I
and
know.
pursuing and pursuing.
I
You know.
know. Everyone's dating everybody else. And so I just then showed up all the places she was. I think today we call that stalking. And I think I was stalking her. And, but thankfully I won and God gave her to me. And I'll just tell you this. She was a force of love. She was a tremendous leader. She was a riot. She had a laugh that you picked up on seismographs. And if you want to be happy, marry a crazy woman. And I did. Totally unpredictable. All the years we were married, you never knew what to predict. Well, on the other hand, she had a deep, profound love affair with Jesus going on all the time. And she was my mirror who told me what I looked like, really, inside. She was my compass who helped me know when I was drifting a little bit. And she was my best friend. And she was the love and the passion of my life. And I would have to say, I think what would measure the impact of her life is that when she went home to be with Jesus, I got hundreds of tributes to her. And they all had a similar theme, and it would go like this: she made me feel. And she did. And it would come special, loved, safe, like it's life I should go on living. I mean, she'd stay up all night on Facebook to save a life or to change a life. So now I take you to May 15th, 2016. Great day, because our oldest grandchild was graduating from high school. He was valedictorian. And he gave a wonderful Christ-honoring talk to a stadium full of people. I had to leave at the end of it because I had guys driving me through the night to get to another state. And so I said, I love you, honey. We're still in the bleachers. And she said, I love you. But then, Davey, she got uncharacteristically teary. We've had 1,000 goodbyes. I've traveled a lot. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I'm really going to miss you. And I said, oh, don't worry, honey, it won't be long. I couldn't have been more wrong.
Wow.
Next afternoon, I got a call from my youngest son. He said, Mom's gone. It was sudden. She'd been the love of my life since I was 19. Davey, you'll understand there's only one person who's done your whole life with you, who, we had the same battles, we've had the same things we've prayed for, we knew the same people, and I love telling her things. It's not, for me, an experience wasn't complete till I could tell Karen about it. Now there's nobody to tell. Oh, there's people to tell, but not somebody who gets me my whole life. And so that was the beginning of my journey that we'll talk about today. But I felt like a lost little boy. Now, I've walked with a lot of people through the valley of the shadow of death. And I've lost parents and, things like that. But they're not the other half of me.
Yeah.
And the loss was incalculable. I literally didn't know what to do 10 minutes from now if I got up off the couch. I would always come in to what we call our great room. It's a large living room. And she would be over there in that blue chair, that blue recliner. And I'd see her crown of glory, which was her hair. And I'd see that great crown of glory. And I was home. But when I got home on May 16th, there was no crown of glory. The chair was there, but the blue chair was empty. I think I could summarize pretty much the strange two things I felt with a blog I wrote afterwards: my shattered heart, my certain hope. Somehow they coexisted, but both were very real.
Yeah. To that end, we discuss that kind of a paradox a lot on the podcast, where we talk about holding the tension between, loss and hope, and how sometimes prior to you walking through a difficult valley, you don't think that you can. You almost see life as either or. And then when you walk through something difficult that doesn't make sense and yet still has meaning, right? You begin to realize that this life has this paradox. Walking with Jesus is living in the tension of these two things where we have heartache and at the same time we have hope. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for me as you were wrestling through that? Just that tension?
Well, Paul talked about it in the Bible when he was talking to a group of people who had lost loved ones. And he said, we do not grieve. Now, if it stopped there, I'd close my Bible and I might never open it again. I'd say, that is a lie. This hurts like nothing has ever hurt before. But he went on to say, we do not grieve as others who have no hope. The difference is simply without the Jesus factor, if you got a scale, it's all grief. That's it all is weighed down on one side. With Jesus, there's this thing called hope on the other side that he is called in the Bible our living hope because of his resurrection from the dead. This is not hope, the idea. This is not positive vibes. This isn't a good feeling. This isn't a religion. This is a death-crushing Savior. There's billions of people who've walked this planet. Only one walked out of his grave under his own power. So now let me tell you, does that hope on the other side erase the grief? It absolutely does not. It is stronger than the grief, but the grief is strong. And so several days in, I started sitting there literally saying, Lord, I am lost. I don't know what to do next. I found an old journal of hers that she really hadn't used, and I started I call it a grief journal now. I never dreamed I'd have one. And there's a few pages in, but if you go a few pages in, you'll see one page, and at the top, you'll see in bold letters something that I was not coherent enough to think. It had to come from God. But this is the turning point. I will not waste this grief. Now you know why the name of your podcast really struck deep in my heart. I will not waste this grief. And then there was a prayer. Lord, if it's going to hurt this bad, would you please use it somehow to make me more useful to you and more help to other people?
Wow.
I had no idea how that could be answered the way I was feeling. I made a decision, Davey, that, being a Christian leader and on the radio and all that stuff, you don't get to do this privately.
Right.
And I made a decision that I wasn't just going to give the Christian talking points. Karen's in heaven, hallelujah, and I'm doing fine. Hallelujah, Karen's in heaven. But the best day of her life was the worst day of mine. She was in heaven, hallelujah. I wasn't. Her kids weren't. Her 9 grandchildren weren't. And for all of us, it was life without this life force, Karen. And so I will not waste this grief. And now I can say, almost 5 years later, God heard that cry of my heart. And I had no idea how real Jesus could be. I've served him my whole life. He hasn't been unreal.
Yeah.
But something happens when there is a heart-rending loss. And that is your heart is wide open. I mean, open in places it's never been open before.
Right.
And what happens at that point, what you allow in, what you invite in at that point, will decide in many ways the rest of your life, because I don't know there's any emotion more powerful than grief. And at that point, I didn't know where to turn except to Jesus. And I just said, Jesus, I don't know how to feel. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do 10 minutes from now. Do what you do. Do what you do. I mean, when Peter was drowning, remember after he'd been walking on water, he could only say 3 words, Lord, save me. It was no big theological prayer like, help. And that was me. It was like, help. And he began to move in to places in my heart that I didn't even know I had places. And he really heard that heart cry. Lord, just do what you do. And the last 5 years have been me experiencing Jesus, not just with my left brain, which guys do. We're left brainers, right? I got a right brain Jesus now, who I feel deeply. I used to be really busy I shouldn't say whenever, but most of the times that there was somebody really hurting and they were going through a grieving time, I'd look at my legal pad and go, I got such a busy day today. I got so much to do. I got a lot of people I got to deal with. Not now.
Yeah.
Not now. It's different now. Now the list gets put down. And I've got to be in touch with that. I've got to, if I possibly can, something's happened in my heart that has helped me feel my Jesus and feel the heart of people who are hurting, not just from a death. There's a lot of grief times we do in our life. We tend to think it's all about when people die. When your marriage is dying, you're grieving. When your health is dying, you're grieving. You go into the doctor's office, you're fine. You come out with what just happened to me? Mm-hmm. The stuff that happened in your past, that you've never dealt with, the abuse, the abandonment, the wounds that have never been dealt with. It may be you've been grieving and re-grieving that constantly. Your dream has died, whatever your dream was. You're not going to have children. You're not going to be married. It looks like you're not going to get well. You're not going to get healthier. When your dream dies, that career you thought you were going to have, you're not. Whatever. All these start the grief process. And let me just say this: at that point, it is not what you lost that will determine the rest of your life. It will be the choices you make as a result of that loss. I had no choice about Karen dying, obviously. But I did have a choice as to whether I was going to do the things that would lead to hope and healing and even hope for other people, or whether I would make the choices that would lead to more hurt, more grief, which, by the way, are the easier ones to make, but the more costly to make.
Ron, I love what you were talking about when it comes to this right brain, left brain thing. What I find when we're working with people, and really in my own grief journey, is that it is necessary that you dive into the deep emotions of wrestling through whatever loss it is that you've experienced. And yet this is the thing that everybody wants to avoid because it hurts deeply. And interestingly enough, with this podcast, there are a large majority of our listeners are they're women. And one of the things as we've studied through this, we attribute it to the fact that there are a lot of men who don't want to talk about pain. They don't want to talk about their own pain. They don't want to dive into the depths of it. It's a lot easier to approach it with a more a strong posterior projection. And yet, what's interesting is back in October, I was helping to lead a widower retreat for 15 widowers. And the first night, we went around and had everybody share their story. For most of these men, even if they had been removed from their loss for months and months and months, this night was the first night they shared their story out loud. And there was unbelievable breakthrough that took place. I mean, you're talking about, Ron, we sat there for about 6 hours. Nobody getting tired, no fatigue setting in, everybody locked into each person's story for the first time, beginning to delve into these deep, anguishing emotions. Can you talk to me a little bit about, I'd say all that to set up, can you talk to me about how that journey was for you? As you were diving into these deep emotions, what did you discover about going through the valley as opposed to trying to avoid it, as opposed to trying to not feel these things?
I had the advantage, I guess you might say, of a lifetime of walking through a lot of hurt with people, a lot of losses with people just because of what I do. And I learned that you can, to bury grief, to make it go in instead of letting it come out, it owns you inside. You don't know that. It'll morph. It'll morph into anger, depression, sometimes suicidal thoughts, all kinds of despair. You won't be able to trace it back to this ungrieved grief. But Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." But you don't get the comfort till you own the loss, and own the deep feelings from a major loss. Yeah. So you don't get the blessed are those who mourn. And so the first thing I tell people is to this sounds so silly, simple, grieve your grief. But for guys, we got to be strong. We've got this whole myth that to weep is to be weak, to grieve is to be unmanly, and all we are doing is burying a ticking time bomb. And when it goes off, it will blow, and it'll blow high and maybe very destructively. And Jesus said, that's why he said, "Blessed are those who mourn." Yeah. Not blessed are those who bury it, who comfort. He said, they will be comforted. They're the ones that are going to experience the comfort that only comes from letting it out. Right. And so I think first I let it out in this grief journal. That's interesting. I know it wasn't another person. Yep. But this little white book that was my wife's, unused, is the record of my journey. And I was in the raw in that thing, man. I mean, I was grieving my grief. And I think about my Savior, who there was no more greater model of manhood than the inventor of manhood, Jesus. And he stands at Lazarus' tomb, knowing he's going to raise him from the dead, but still feeling the feelings of the people around him and his own loss, and that he hadn't been there before Lazarus died, even though he's going to do a greater thing. And what's the shortest verse in the Bible? My favorite memory verse. Jesus wept. Here he cries, this rugged carpenter, no power tools. I mean, he's weeping at this tomb openly with this crowd of people. When he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane to deal with the fact he's going to be carrying the hell of billions of people in his soul on the cross, he's melting down. I mean, you read the verbs there and read them in the original Greek language of the Bible. He is falling apart. I would want to go alone to a garden knowing what I was going to be going through. I wouldn't want to take the 3 closest guys to me. I don't want them to see me like that. He chooses to take them to the garden with him where he's going to fall apart. And I think he knows he is. Yeah. So this is a Jesus. This is the manliest man who ever lived. And when he's hurting, he externalizes it. He doesn't internalize it. that's got to be my model. And so um, then my grief, first of all, started to appear in that grief journal. And then I could begin to express it in certain parts of it to my kids, finding out they were all grieving, each one differently, because grief is so individual.
Right.
And then I could begin to talk to some friends about it. And instead of burying it where it would become a toxic waste dump, giving off this radiation in every part of my life, ungrieved grief is a monster. You know that, Davey.
Right.
It is a monster.
Right.
And Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn. Not wrecked are those who mourn. He says, blessed are those who mourn. They'll be comforted in the process of letting it go.
Yeah.
And we guys are so guarded by emotions like that. And we are sentencing ourselves to inner torture for years to come that will affect people we love who've done nothing bad to us.
Right.
But this hurt is going to come out in a different way. We'll hurt them who don't deserve it.
Yeah. It's so good, man. So true. So true. You know, one of the things I heard as you were talking about Karen, and you used some metaphors of her relationship to you. And, you know, you said she was my mirror. She was my compass. She was my best friend. These are all very, very much tethered to your identity, you know, and that's one of the things about marriage is that you become one, you become one flesh. And then when you lose your spouse, then there's this severing that happens that you feel like I would describe it as we became one and then I felt like a half and I didn't know who I was in a lot of ways. There was an identity crisis that I was going through. And so I imagine, especially you guys were married for over 50 years. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I can only imagine the identity crisis.
I was married at the age of 6. You're not going to believe that.
Well, first of all, I mean, 50.
Seriously, I mean, it was a bond that was incredible.
Well, 50 years of marriage plus is rare in and of itself these days. Unfortunately, it's so sad that that's the case. And so I can only imagine how tightly knit the two of your lives were together, right? It's the whole idea of the leave, cleave, and weave. Your whole life was being woven together, and now she's gone, and you're wrestling with, in this new season of your life, who am I? I have to imagine. What did God? What kind of a journey did God take you on? How did He meet you in some of those identity crises? And I imagine some of it came out in this journal. You know, one of the things I love about like C.S. Lewis's journal that he wrote, A Grief Observed, it was like, it felt like this identity journey for him. And I can imagine that was probably the case for you as well.
It's really important I think, to journal, to write, even though if you're not a writer, it's the first step in externalizing rather than internalizing the deepest wound of your life. I think how can I put this? All the things that Karen was for me, compass, helping me know when I was getting lost, you know, I could go on with imagery. Now, if I could come to grips with the fact that God had decided, the God who numbered all the days of her life before her life began, according to the Bible, had decided that what she had been for me, He could be for me now. That was hard for me to swallow. It was very hard to swallow.
Yeah.
But what I found myself, and I find my kids doing the same, our kids doing the same thing, is now processing life as she taught us to, without her being here. I mean, that's how we all grew up. I mean, for a while we had a parent helping us with everything, walking, talking, you know, and then we got to the point where we could do it without them. If you'd have told me I was going to do it without Karen, I'd have said that's not possible. But I think we find that her voice, not in a mystical way, I mean, how she taught us to think. God said, it's time now that you graduate, just like a kid who's always had to have his parent hold their hand walking. It's time for you to walk with just me now, with just me, your Savior.
Right.
And I was amazed now I will tell you this, I blasted praise music a lot. I really needed to just have a sense of the presence of Jesus.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, whenever I could, I just saturated myself with the music and the reading and the word of God that would give me a strong sense of his presence. And I began, you begin to say things that she said, except she normally would have had to say them. Now I'm saying them and they've become mine now. It's not secondhand. It is truly firsthand. And I realized that God had used her, and I hope he used me in her life the same way. We'd have to ask her that in heaven. But that ways that she thought, ways that she approached life, her practicality, her honesty, I had become that without even knowing it. And now it was not a secondhand. It became firsthand me. Does that make any sense?
Yep.
And so and our kids have begun to discover that the very same thing has happened, and we're saying what she would have said, and we're stronger because of that. We're not depending on her for that. It's a painful amputation. It's a horrible amputation, and I would say that the sense of her missingness, her loss, is like a tune, a minor key tune, playing underneath all the time. Now, in the period right after we lost her, it was blaring. I couldn't hear any major key music, well, very seldom. But now it still plays. It's still there. Karen's not here. The loss, I'm reminded of it constantly by, I want to ask, that recliner she was in is empty, all the time. So, but there is a sense now that it plays all the time. But there is this major key now that has occurred from what I've learned from her loss, that has allowed Jesus to become for me perhaps things that I was leaning on her to be. And now every once in a while, this lower key thing will turn up real loud, some memory, some reminder, But now, most of the time, it's major key, with that knowing that underneath, and you know what? One great Christian scholar said, don't expect the hole in your heart to go away.
Yeah.
Bonhoeffer said this. He said, don't expect that hole in your heart. God's going to leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's where the person you love lives, in your heart. Mm-hmm. And all that they were to you lives there. But what he will do is he will envelop it with new music, new experiences. And I am a man, I'm much of what I am today is because of the woman I married.
Yeah.
But much of what I've become now is actually because she's not here, and the seeds that she planted have a chance to become me, not her.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense. I know.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me because I've been there in my own journey in the same way of realizing some newness to your personhood. I mean, when you experience a death in your life, you die as well. And yet I'm reminded of the what Jesus said when he said, unless a single seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. And so there's something about death, just the circumstance of death that ends up spawning new life, and it spawns it inside of you as well in your identity. You begin to become the growth, the outgrowth of the seeds that your loved one planted in you.
And it gives you new qualifications to be of help to other hurting people.
That's right. That's right. We call it street cred. That's what I told these widowers at this retreat. I said, guys, you guys now have street cred, because you've probably heard the old adage, don't trust a leader that doesn't walk with a limp. Now you walk with a limp.
His name is Jesus. Nail prints in his hands and feet. That's the only thing he took to heaven with him.
Right.
From earth was the nail prints and the wound in his side.
Right.
And we'll know him when we see him, because we'll look for the one with the nail prints.
That's so good.
And he suffered, and I find myself now, instead of being so busy, I really can't stop. I feel compelled to. I want to stop for the person who's experiencing a great loss, and I'm of more value now, not because I'm valuable, but I have more to give because of what I've lost.
Isn't that the irony of ironies? You know, when you lose, you actually feel empty.
Yeah, you
feel like you have less to eat, right? You're like, I feel completely gutted. And yet out of that, I have more to give, you know?
But see, that's when God became a man in Jesus. What does the Bible tell us about that? That he became able to identify with at a gut level,
right,
with our suffering,
right,
and so I can say to Jesus at the greatest level of hurt and pain, you get me, don't you? Nobody else in the world. Could I say that too?
Yep.
Hold on one second. Excuse me. There we go. Batteries are not forever.
You know, Ron, you mentioned this, you said this phrase, what I've learned from the loss. You know, we talk a lot about the classroom of pain, you know, that if we lean in and we listen to Jesus during this pain, Isaiah 30 calls him the teacher, that he will whisper to us, this is the way, walk in it. And he will teach us things in this classroom of pain. What are some of the major things that you feel like that God has really been teaching you through this classroom of pain, so to speak? I know we've already touched on one of those, that you have this increased capacity for empathy and influence in other people's pain journey as well, or their journey in general. What are some other, things that you've learned in this classroom of pain?
Well, of course, as I said, that right side of my brain and my heart, you might say, has opened up. And I think I am, because of what I never would have chosen, I think I have more value to other people because I don't just sympathize. Now I empathize. And the loss might be medical, the loss might be financial, the loss might be career, the loss might be a dream. Like I said, there's many, medical, whatever it is. But so I think that is critical. The fact that I can walk with people through losses that in a way I never could before. I have much more to give. And I've found that, when you least feel like reaching out to other people, it's probably is when you need to do it.
Wow, yeah.
There's Proverbs says, he that refreshes others will himself be refreshed. It's crazy. It's like, and when you are mourning a loss, whatever that, in whatever area of your life, you're like, I don't feel like it. Yeah, well, that's when you need to reach out. I found, the one who was able to help me the most in the shocking time of mourning was my good friend who had lost his wife through agony over months 5 years before. He's the one that called. He was the first one to call. And he had done the journey. And what I learned from watching him is that in a way you never would choose, you're becoming qualified to be of more help in a broken world than you've ever been before. If you make the Jesus choices to and how to handle it, you can also become more of a hard-hearted person as a result. You're either going to turn softer inside or harder inside. You will never be the same from any major life loss. So it has been, now when I look at what I have gained because of the greatest loss of my life, oh, how I would love to do the rest of my life with Karen, but I wouldn't trade the gains.
Wow.
I would never want to lose the gains. And there was no other way to get them except to walk through the valley of the shadow of death and have no one but Jesus. And I can say with all my heart, the anchor holds.
Yeah.
No matter what the storm, no matter how fierce it is.
Yeah.
And I can prove it because of what's happened to me.
Yeah.
And so I am probably of more value now in a hurting world than I've ever been, not because of me, but because, and look, even the Son of God came here and entered into our suffering that in a way, at least from our perspective, has qualified him to be a savior to us in our darkest hours.
Right.
Even the Son of God, through his suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the most fascinating stories to me in the Gospels is Matthew chapter 14, where Jesus feeds the 5,000. But we often gloss over what he was trying to do before the crowds caught up to him. He was trying to get away to grieve.
Yeah.
He was grieving the loss of his he had just heard the news of John the Baptist being beheaded, and he's trying to get away from the crowd, and they run to catch up to him. And he performs the greatest that we know of, at least public, from a volume standpoint, the greatest miracle that's recorded in the Gospels, where he feeds the 5,000. And scholars believe it's probably 20,000 people when you include women and children. And it was all out of this like deep place of anguish and brokenness that he was able to do that. And I think that's exactly what you're saying here, is that we are becoming a blessing to the world as we are willing to step into those broken spaces, as we're willing to let the Lord do his work in our heart and our brokenness. Now we're able to live that out as a blessing to other people.
But if you have left it as an untreated wound inside you, it will harden you.
Yeah.
It won't make you more, it will not make you part of the answer in a broken world.
That's right.
It will make you part of the problem. You'll be another hard heart, or a self-centered, it's all about me, I'm hurting. And so, I talk about defiant hope, which sounds like a strange.
I'm so glad you just I was literally about to ask you this, because, you just released this book, and it's called Hope When Your Heart Is Breaking. And that's one of the key phrases that you use, defiant hope. It was such an intriguing phrase to me when I saw that. I was like, wow, I like the sound of that, but I'd love for you to unpack it a little bit.
Well, it involves some choices. It says, I want this to make me better, not bitter. And I want it to make me more tender-hearted, not more hard-hearted. It is the picture for me. I was in the New York area when September 11th happened. I was still living in the New York area. And there is a picture that we all remember that epitomizes that day. That is 3 firefighters raising a flag. Anybody listening can picture it right now. It's the iconic, almost a picture for a generation. This is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They know that There aren't going to be many survivors at this point. Most hope has been crushed. There's another one of the buildings in that complex about to fall. These guys find a flag, these 3 firefighters, and raise it on that pile of rubble. There was nothing around them to give them hope. This is defiant hope that raises a flag over a pile of rubble. And that's what I had on that May Day, 5 years ago, almost. That there was that the flag of hope was to say, Jesus can do something with this that only he could do.
Right.
And instead of giving up, you open up. And instead of burying, you expose. You get it out there. Blessed are those who mourn, Jesus said. Let it happen, for they shall be comforted. But you got to open up that space for the comfort to come in. And that, at the point where I was doing that and being raw in the raw emotionally, Jesus came rushing in, came flooding in.
Wow.
Blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. And I got resources to give hurting people now.
Yeah.
I say things I didn't even know I knew. You know, sometimes we don't want to, you go to a funeral and you're like, I don't even know if I want to get in that line because I don't know what to say. And probably what to say isn't to say hardly anything. You know, it's to hug and hold and listen to them tell their stories of that person and their grief. So I have become qualified by the worst thing that ever happened to me to be of help to other people who are experiencing the worst things that ever have happened to them.
Wow. And
that, when you can add meaning to your grief and a mission now in a broken, wounded, weeping world, all of a sudden, what's the Bible say? That your mourning will turn to dancing? Well, I'm not much of a dancer, but I understand that when you open up that grief to this Jesus who grieved on a level over the sin of this world in a way that none of us have ever grieved. So he gets our grief. He gets us at our bottom, right at the bottom of our emotions. When you open up to him, you can become a wounded healer. You're wounded, but you can now become that person who is there in the most broken moments of someone's life. And suddenly, your loss has meaning, it has purpose. And you say, now I know why I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I understand that there was probably no other way I could have become this man, but to become this man unthinkably,
right, without
my Karen.
Wow. Wow. Well, Rana, you know, it's absolutely true. I can see it's evident in you. And I know that you've spent years in Christian work and Christian ministry, and there's tons of, you know, impacting thousands and thousands of people, but the impact that you're going to have and that you are having right now in the wake of your hurt is going to be unprecedented. You know, the years in the past will pale in comparison to the impact that you're having right now. So I just thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing with us your story and what God has taught you through that. I know it's encouraging so many people who are listening to this right now. And I want to make sure everybody goes and picks up your book, Hope When Your Heart Is Hurting. It released this past January. And I know I'm excited to get my hands on it. Just being able to get a little bit of a tease from you personally right now. So I appreciate you spending some time with us.
Well, thank you. You know, there's a great statement that says, speaking of Jesus, that, hold on one second. There is this wonderful statement in the book of Hebrews. It says, we have this hope, speaking of Jesus, as an anchor for the soul.
That's right.
firm and secure. And I would say to anyone listening right now, there is no storm that can shake this anchor.
Yep.
And you do not have to sink if you will go to the one who conquered death and will bring to you an ability to be unsinkable in the worst of storms. But pour out your heart to him and don't guard your heart. Don't guard it. Grieve your grief with the one who the Bible calls our man of sorrows. And you will become a greater help to more people than you've ever been in your life.
That's right.
Let the grief happen so the miracle can happen.
So good. So good. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.